Good morning. Welcome to the Stratus webinar today. Purpose of the session will be to provide you with an overview of purchase to pay automation and how that can empower accounts payable staff. My name's Ashley Hamer. I'm the CIO at Stratus, and I'm joined today by Rachel Lockley, who is the director of our purchase to pay division, with a wealth of experience across that process, who will be leading the webinar today. A little bit about Stratus before we start. We are digital transformation specialists. We've been helping organizations since 2010 automate business process that is really focused and underpinned by documents, either physical or digital. And that automation really there to deliver through a people, process and technology platform the benefits that transformation provides. And a great example of that is how we help automate purchase to pay, clearly underpinned by a number of pieces of documentation such as invoices, goods receipt notes or purchase orders. So without avail, I'll hand over to Rachel to introduce herself. Give a little bit of background as to her experience, and then we'll move into the webinar. There are assets and documents available that you can download during the course of the session, and please feel free to drop any questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the presentation. So, Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to give a bit of background of how I come to be talking to you today. So I'm the Purchase to Pay Solution Director at Stratus, and that means I look after all of the products that we have in the portfolio that relate to this business process. We don't come into this thinking that accounts payable automation is a one-size-fits-all approach. We have multiple solutions in the portfolio, really tailored to particular people's situations, both now and their future requirements. And I look after everything that we deliver in those solutions. How I know accounts payable isn't one size fits all is that I have been an accounts payable or shared services manager myself operationally for 21 years, both in the UK and in Australia. And after doing my first implementation of a solution like this, I felt that was an interesting place for me to be in. So I actually moved on to the other side to help deliver these solutions. And I've been working with people to transition from paper to automation probably for the last 14 years. So today I'm going to run through a very high level demonstration of the software. Beyond this, anybody who wants a more tailored sort of one-to-one demonstration, that's fine. You have the contact links that will be available throughout the demo. But today is just about giving you a flavor of what these solutions can do. And the first thing I always like to talk about are the benefits of the automation. Obviously, you don't put something in if you're not going to realize benefits from it. And the first one, which is probably the one with the biggest impact, relates to the processing today in a manual process is everybody is keying invoices into the ERP. With this technology, it will be extracting information from the invoices and receiving information from the finance system, such as purchase orders and goods receipts, and actually performing that matching for you. So in the future state, any invoices that come into the system that perfectly match the order within any tolerance you set will be able to go straight through the system without anybody needing to touch them. That obviously will decrease the labor that's needed for the accounts payable process, and also allows it to become much more proactive. And one thing that is really key that lots of people tell us that this particular point relates to is the challenges at month end. Suppliers will very often date their invoices the last day of the month, so any accounts payable team has a higher than normal volume to try and handle during that time. And when it's month end and there's pressure on to close the month, people do tell us that sometimes they might push through an invoice that's outside of tolerance just slightly because they just don't have the time to query it. These solutions will flatline the peaks and troughs during the month and actually give you back all of the time to make sure you're querying every invoice you should be. A byproduct of doing the matching within the workflow tool itself is that it's capturing information about invoices that do match or don't, and it provides you some really detailed analytics at supplier level about how your suppliers are working within your processes that you choose. If somebody needs to handle an invoice, we make it as easy for them as possible to do that. That always has a positive impact on getting the invoices posted into the finance system. So we see some real improvement in processing times. At any time, accounts payable can see where the invoices are, who's got them, the value of them, and certainly with non-PO invoices, this helps with any accruals that need to happen at month end. And finally, the system itself is its own storage repository. There's no need for printing anything off at the start of the process, and there's no need for filing anything at the end. It becomes like an electronic filing cabinet. Even after an invoice has been paid, you can still go back to that document and add anything else, any other documents that you need to file alongside them. And they will stay in the storage for as long as you need, minimum 7 years to satisfy HMRC, but certainly and beyond. We don't dictate when they need to be archived. This slide is giving you an idea of some of the customers that we deal with these solutions. We have more than one, as I've mentioned before, more than one solution, and these customers are across all of those products. We do not specialize in a particular industry. We do have lots of electrical wholesale logos on here. That's because we've been lucky enough to get lots of referrals from that industry. It's a very close industry and people tend to recommend us to their friends, which is very nice to hear. But we don't specialize in one particular industry or finance system or volume. We would range here from some customers processing over 500,000 invoices a year into something like SAP, right down to some other customers processing just 1,000 invoices a year into Sage 50. The next slide is going to build and explain the future state with the automation and how this solution connects with finance systems, etc. And the first thing to talk about in the new world is any invoices that arrive as a physical piece of paper in the mail will need to be scanned. There's no special hardware needed to scan them. They would just be scanned on any existing multifunction device you have in the business today. And everything then gets submitted by email. So you can give your suppliers that email address to send their invoices in directly. You can receive them to a central mailbox, potentially triage them first, manually forward them, or create auto forward rules. But everything comes into a dedicated email address we provide. And that's really important for the next process, which is our e-invoice technology. This is our own technology that we created. And it is querying all invoices that arrive to look for invoices that are what we would call a data readable PDF. That normally means it's come straight from the supplier's finance system as a PDF attached to an email, and it's actually got a data layer embedded into that invoice. The e-invoice module will extract that data 100% accurately and send it directly into the workflow tool. So that process is invisible for you. The first time you see any invoices is when they've arrived in workflow and the first pass of matching has happened. Onboarding suppliers is an ongoing process. So if an invoice comes in for a supplier that is sending in a data readable PDF, but we haven't yet onboarded them, we take a copy of it and put it in a folder called To Be Onboarded. And we have a team of people constantly going through that based on the highest volume and onboarding more suppliers. So we don't hold up the invoice that's just come in. We actually send that through our capture or OCR engine. That will be the first time that you might need to touch or see or correct an invoice. Once they're released, they will join up with the other invoices in workflow. But as we are onboarding more suppliers, you would see over time the invoices you need to touch and capture to be reducing. So now all of the images and associated data are in the workflow and the matching is happening. And that's happening by taking a feed of information from the ERP. Things like suppliers, chart of accounts, purchase orders and goods receipts, all the information the software needs to use to actually build that invoice file. Anybody who does need to touch an invoice will log into a particular web page. I'm going to show some examples of that today. They will then handle their invoices, and at the end of the process, the invoices will be automatically posted to the ERP without any need for any manual keying or any touch points. When I log into the system, I would go through the DataForge portal. So this is where all of our solutions that we have in the portfolio and host are shown. So DataForge is our hosted environment. So the two that I'm going to focus on today are the two top left icons, Capture and Purchase to Pay. I do have other icons here. They are for some of the other products I have in the portfolio. And then towards the bottom, you can also see some of the other products that we have that might be non-financial, such as electronic proof of delivery, content management for other documentation for other non-financial business processes, and things like inbound and outbound mail. So when I want to access any of these tools, I click into the icon and it brings me into the certain pages. To give you an idea of our OCR capture, this is the sort of screen that you would see if the invoices haven't gone through e-invoice and you are needing to touch or check them. In this particular case, this invoice is all fully valid, but it's showing you in the central panel an invoice with, hopefully you can see there's blue highlighted text all over this invoice. And this is using your reference data for the supplier to actually identify who this supplier is and then populating all of the information. One thing that's really important to explain is OCR technology now is not the case that you have to template every supplier invoice that comes in. That's quite an old style deployment of OCR technology. You used to have to teach the system a location on the page where all of the information was. And if you had 2,000-3,000 suppliers, to actually get the benefit, you had to teach it 2,000 or 3,000 times, plus any difference in a credit note template. And it really put people off deploying this type of solution. What the system does now is it reads every word on every page and it is looking for keyword searches to identify the information it needs to populate. So for example, the invoice number field over here is actually just says the word invoice on the page. So behind each of these fields it's populating is a huge library of terminology with a confidence level associated to it. And that's helping the system find all the information without you needing to touch it. Once invoices have gone through here, you will release them through to the workflow. When they come into the workflow, they will arrive in this screen that accounts payable only use, and it's called the invoice log. It's a really simple system to teach. It uses for purchase order matching a really simple traffic light color system. So we have a number of invoices on this screen that are all showing the purchase order flagged in green. They say that they're matched, and this transfer button is ticked, ready to be exported to the ERP. That's absolutely where you want to get to, touchless processing, straight through processing. But what this is simulating is actually what most people do. On day one, you don't necessarily have the comfort and confidence for invoices to be sailing through the system. So the system itself will move at your pace. Right now, I'm still reviewing everything that comes in. And only when I'm comfortable would I switch on the auto transfer functionality. And that's actually when I start to get my real straight through processing. We have invoices with purchase orders flagged in yellow, which is one of the most common exceptions. This is no goods receipt. So we recognize the invoice has a valid PO, but nobody's done a goods receipt for it yet. So we have a concept called rematching. And this is a number of days that you choose to wait for a goods receipt to happen, especially if the supplier is emailing their invoices into you on dispatch of goods. You're absolutely going to receive the invoice and the goods are genuinely still in transit. So we don't want to set off all the sirens at this stage and make it an exception. We just want to wait. So every day for the number of rematching days you choose to set, the system is looking, have we had a goods receipt yet? Ideally, in this case, the goods will be receipted tomorrow. We would get an updated feed of information. That PO turns green and continues on its journey. So no goods receipt exceptions become self-resolving without AP needing to get involved. If it's still not goods receipted after the rematching days you've set, it does become an exception and it will workflow it to the person who's raised the order, and they will get a reminder every day. We have some other purchase order numbers here flagged in red, and there are a few different reasons. And in a live demo, I would hover over and show you. But briefly, we have some ones here where this purchase order number is an incorrect PO. It doesn't exist. It's actually a really old date. This one down here is where the purchase order has actually been used up in full on previous invoices, highlighting quite a bad supplier behavior where they want to date their invoice the last day of the month to get it to you so they can be paid in 30 days, but they don't have an up-to-date PO. So they submit it anyway on that date and then deal with the query. From their perspective, they're still going to get paid on time. Some of the reports that I'm going to show you will actually start to expose the suppliers that are doing this behavior. It's really hard to try and capture that in a manual process because you're just frantically keying to get invoices on. This reporting is going to feed you back information about who is doing the wrong thing. We have queries here that are price variance, and you can choose how the behavior of a price variance happens. There's obviously tolerances allowed within the system, but you could say AP look at it first, it could go to a central procurement team or back to the buyer themselves, and you make those choices in the configuration. We also get really clever with non-PO. It's very common with some workflow tools that they say, yep, we can handle all your PO invoices, and give you a bit of a blank look when it comes to non-PO because they kind of say, well, we don't have the information to automate them. You teach the system this info. And in this case, some of these invoices that are non-PO actually also have the transfer button ticked. And that's because they have a predetermined flow proposal, which is our terminology for the workflow route that an invoice is going to take. So with this invoice, I chose when I first saw it that every time an invoice comes in from plan, it's going to go to the same approver and it's going to get coded to the same place. So I told the system that information. Every future invoice will come straight through the system and go straight out to the approver. We also instantly check for duplicates. There's no point trying to do any other matching or anything. If it's a duplicate, we flag that to you straight away and give you the serial number of the invoice that already exists. When invoices are workflowed to people, every day that they have an invoice in their queue that they need to handle, they will get this daily reminder mail. It's a consolidated mail with a list of all of the invoices. And at the bottom of the mail, there's a hyperlink. If they click the hyperlink on their desktop, they will come into this screen that we're looking at now, which will give them that list of the same invoices that they need to handle. If they click the hyperlink from a mobile device, they will come through to a mobile version of the web page. It's not an app, it's just optimized for mobile working. So they still see the same list of the invoices. They can see the invoices here, click on the image, still do coding, approve or reject any invoice and see any other comments. So this goes back to the point about making things as easy as possible for people to approve. Back in the desktop, anybody who wants to click to open an invoice just chooses the invoice, and this is the view that an approver would get. They see the full invoice no matter how many pages it is. This is a 4-page invoice. They can't change anything about the header, that's fully grayed out. And this invoice has come to them pre-coded. It's also added in a next approver because in this case, the invoice is more than the operation manager's approval limit. So the system is clever enough to add their manager in to make sure the value of the invoice is appropriately approved. You can also send queries to suppliers, which I've done down here. Please provide a proof of delivery, and accounts payable can view that at any time. If the supplier is chasing them for payment, they can read this and say, well, actually, we asked for proof of delivery, you need to send it. Thinking back to the electronic filing cabinet, once the proof of delivery arrives, the approver can choose, it's not mandatory, they can choose to actually add that proof of delivery and the associated image and file it away with the invoice. I'm now going to talk through some of the key reports that I've mentioned a couple of times through the demonstration. And the first one is the show invoice report. So this is a report that's used multiple times a day, and it's how you find, or accounts payable find, anything. So when I run my show invoice report with whatever filter criteria I have, there are 40 something different possible filters I could choose before I did my search set. But I've said here, show me all the active invoices. So I can see the role that's got them, the date they've had them since, supplier info, PO info, dates, amounts, etc. And I could see that there's £46,000 worth of invoices that are out for approval. I can export this to Excel, and when I do that, I can then also see the line items if I wanted to, and that's the report that helps you with accruals. The next report is my favorite report within the system. It's match statistics. It's the one I've talked about a few times where suppliers are about to be exposed of how they're behaving with your processes. This is a 1 month snapshot for one of the customers, and I have it sorted by the number of invoices that were sent in by a particular supplier. So this supplier sent in 430 invoices, and 171 of them were a perfect match. That's a straight through process. Nobody touched them. And over in this column, 40% is flagged in red. And that's the system saying that's a bad number. Yellow is average and green is good. And depending on the column, sometimes good is high, sometimes good is low. And on this snapshot, there are only 2 suppliers on the whole of the highest volume where all of the icons are in green. The rest of them, there's issues somewhere. Back to the top supplier, if 40% of their invoices matched perfectly, the remaining 3 columns are what happened to the rest. So 26% remained no goods receipt. If I was reviewing this report in this column and I looked down here and I saw more reds and yellows than I did greens, it might be telling me that I've set my rematching days too low. That's really simple to fix in the system. You just change up the days and everything potentially might then become more straight through processed. It might actually be telling me, no, my rematching days are right, but there's a fundamental problem in the business with the speed in which goods are being booked in. And these reports are designed to feed you information to assist with continuous improvement. Because we don't just put the system in and say, right, you're automated now, you're done, because you're kind of never done. Your suppliers change and their behavior might not be matching your processes. Your people change and it might highlight a training requirement. And you can be absolutely certain that your prices change. And you can use this report and click on the grey bar at the top to sort in ascending or descending order. So if I wanted to look at the highest volume of price variances, I've jumped this supplier straight to the top of the queue, and 53% of their invoices don't match on price. I can click into this and drill all the way into the individual invoices, and I might look at that and see that there's actually been a price increase on a particular product that we order all the time, and I haven't updated it in the finance system or ERP. When I do that, hopefully I'm going to get much more straight through process. I might click and review and see that the supplier suddenly started charging a freight charge that was never agreed, and that's why nothing's matching. So always feeding you the biggest ways for you to increase your straight through. And the final column, not matched, is the other reasons that invoices don't match, such as incorrect purchase order, PO already used up in full, or things like the supplier is not the same as on the purchase order. And at the end of this report, it always gives you, for whatever time frame you ran it, it gives you your overall percentage of straight through. So in this case, in this month, 52% of all invoices went straight through the system without anybody needing to touch them. This last screen on match statistics is what it shows you if you click into that first line on a supplier. It tells you every single invoice and ones that were deliveries, price variances, all the different reasons that invoices don't match. The next report of processing days, I believe that there are 2 ways that you can run this report. One gives you what I would call the negative view of the process, and the other one is the positive view. And this is all around process efficiency. Again, it's detailed by supplier, and I have it sorted for the negative view by the average number of roles involved in processing these invoices. So this is telling me one invoice for just under £11,000 went to 7 people and took 22 days to get approved. In isolation, I might not be too concerned. It might be a non-PO that needed to bounce around the business. But if I'm thinking about continuous improvement, I might want to look into why 49 invoices that must be less than £1,000 each go to 4 people and take 10 days to get approved. Because in the new world, 10 days is an awful long time for an invoice to be approved. In the negative view, we have a really low volume of invoices and a relatively low value. So if I change this view to what I would call the positive view of the process, now we see a high value of spend, a really high volume of invoices that have gone through one role, which is probably the perfect match role, and have been posted into the ERP within 2 days or less. And what some customers tell us they use this report for, if it is something that's of interest within your business, is to identify suppliers that they can negotiate early payment discounts with. Because if we take any of these numbers where invoices have been posted into the finance system within 2 days, they just then sit there to wait until they're due for payment. And anything on this that has early payment discount, where instead of paying the supplier in 30 days, you negotiate the discount for paying them in 14, you're really confident you're always going to meet that commitment, and that's not an insignificant value of money to be getting a discount on. It's not for everyone, but a lot of people tell us that they do use it for that reason. And then the last report I'm going to go through today is the bottlenecks report. So this is also like the naughty list. When an invoice gets workflowed to somebody, the clock starts ticking. The moment they release it, the clock stops, whether that's released to be posted to the ERP or released on to the next approver. So we then can collect information about how long people are taking to process their invoices. Whoever this worst person is here had a total of 2 invoices and took on average 43 days to process them. The interesting thing about this report is accounts payable will also always appear on it. And what you see in terms of the volumes is a significant increase of the number of invoices that accounts payable can be processing within 1 to 2 days and getting invoices out to their appropriate approver. So those people in the business that might, working back to my experience of being an AP manager, blaming AP, they didn't handle the invoice quickly enough. This report is actually showing exactly where those bottlenecks happened. All of the reports can be exported to Excel. You can share them with the business, name and shame. You can also give people view-only access, so they're not seeing the actual invoices, but they can see how they match up against their peers. We have part of the handouts on the webinar is the Brian Curry case study. Encourage you to have a look at that. It will show a real life story of somebody who deployed this particular solution that I've shown you today. And that's it for me. Back to Ashley.
Thanks, Rachel. As informative as ever, so thank you for that again. We have had some questions come in, and some great questions as well. And looking at them, I think there's one I can answer, so I think the rest are going to be yours, Rich. From a Sarbanes-Oxley point of view and an audit perspective, Juliana asks, if a new supplier appears in the system, can there be an automatic stop on that supplier so they can move into a vetting process to be approved?
Absolutely. So the system uses your reference data to match up who the supplier is. So if it's a new supplier that doesn't yet exist, then it's going to automatically stop anyway, because you can't move on an invoice without particular key information, and the supplier is one of them. If it's new and you want to actually, it is already in the ERP, but you want to still vet it, you can actually in the system place a temporary block on a supplier, and you can put reasons for that as well. That will then come up in the invoice log screen that we saw, and it will be highlighting that to the team, and then they can email images off to people or do the vetting that they need to do. So absolutely.
And again, linked to that, Rach, another question around, I guess, process automation within the platform. Can invoices be automatically rejected back to a supplier where there's no purchase order?
They can. That will typically automatically rejected is the key word there. To automatically reject something, you need to stop it when it first comes into the system. And what I've just shown is first coming into the system is actually the capture or the e-invoice side of things. So we absolutely can do it at that point. From an experience perspective, so the simple answer is yes, but from an experience perspective, Sometimes invoices are coming from a supplier's ERP and they might have a no reply email address or an unmanned mailbox. So you can pretty much have whatever you want, but with experience, there are always cautions around. We might think, or you might think it's being automatically bounced back, but it's going to be undelivered, or nobody, it's an unmanned mailbox. So there are cautions around it. You can manually click it within the workflow and actually record that you've done it. So there are always options for where you can do those types of things.
Fantastic. One that I can probably answer. We've had a question from Justin who asks, does the DataForge software read invoices received from foreign suppliers? And can it see the keywords on the invoices when they're in different languages? The underlying DataForge technology supports over 200 languages and has the capability to auto-detect a language based on the AI that's built into that technology as they're received into the system. So yes, it can and does. Lisa asks an interesting question. How does the solution process bulk or fixed assets coming into the platform?
So that is, there could be lots of meanings behind that question. Fixed assets, we actually have the ability to load assets into the system and match invoices against assets, have an asset register within it. Normally that type of question from a AP process perspective is possibly better to be done on a one-to-one demo, where all of my 21 years of processing invoices, we can actually get into a conversation about what you do today and how it gets automated. But one point on that is very often the automation will work with whatever you're doing today. It just automates it. It's very rare, if ever, that we deploy a solution where we dictate the way you process. The point of our solutions are to take your existing processes and actually just apply automation to make them touchless. So Lisa, we probably would need to get into a bit more of a two-way conversation on that one, if that's okay.
Okay, there's two or three questions that are probably linked together and again, the royal we, Rachel, I'm afraid, can probably answer. So a few questions around ERPs and integrations. So for example, how does the ERP connect to the platform? Does it use the ERP's API? Someone has asked, does the system integrate with other automotive systems, such as Pinewood, which is related, I think? And also a question which talks about the organization using a Concur system for their expenses processing. And will the platform work with other systems to create BACS runs, for example?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, integration. So most of our systems, all of our systems actually, as you saw with the logo, I mentioned we work with any ERP system. Sometimes that means that there is a pre-built connector that we will connect up to. For example, 365 Business Central connector. F&O, there's also a pre-built connector, so that just plugs the systems together. Same with Sage 200, Sage 50. We have lots of connectors that we have in place. For some other finance systems, we will work with the technical people on the side of the ERP provider and work together to use what we call flat files, which is just a file exchange in a secure file transfer system. But everything gets done once and it's replicatable for each customer. And that's systems such as AutoWise, Mace, Reynolds & Reynolds, etc. for the Power product. Then we have situations where somebody has another ERP that we haven't yet connected with, but at some stage, with all of my probably over 100 installations that I've done now across the number of years I've been working with this product, at some stage they were always the first. And we will always work with the finance or ERP system provider to come up with an integration. It might be a web service. We have that with a system called Mace. It might be flat files. So it's very much something like Pinewood, for example. We would normally look to the end user to connect us up or sponsor us in to talk to them, and then things get built and then the systems are connected. In terms of the concur for expenses and then a BACS run, typically my mind goes to a BACS run is normally generated within a finance system, but I understand that not all finance systems are created equally and it's not always that easy. So processing things within our system and what gets exported at the end of the process is very configurable / customizable. So we could create a BACS export file that you can import straight into the bank. So the answer to that is yes as well.
Great. A raft of questions today, which is fantastic. Another one around reporting, Rachel. We've talked about and shown how we can track trends by supplier on their invoices received and their relationship to the purchase orders and goods receipts, for example. The question is, can you show that reporting to highlight depots, for example, within the business that are failing to goods receipt against a purchase order and invoice?
Yes, so a depot would hopefully be a cost center or one of what we would call a dimension. So any invoice has got coding on it. There's always a GL, nominal code, account code, whatever terminology you want to use. And often there are other criteria: cost center, project, department, depot. If that is part of the coding, any of the reports that I showed, including the match statistics report, you can, the filter before you run it, you can actually put a cost center depot, for example, in that. And actually then it's just showing you all the suppliers that deal with that depot, and you can look at their rematching and their delivery variance versus the whole company. So absolutely.
Fantastic. And are the VAT tax categories automatically detected by the system and calculated on?
Yes. Yeah, and taken from the finance system. So we're using the finance system's VAT codes, and then the capture is also calculating that things are correct.
And I think related to your previous answer as well, Rachel, a question around invoices that are received that need to be split across different divisions within the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's within the coding screen and also in the invoice log, you can set predetermined percentage splits and assign that against the supplier. So every time an invoice comes in, it's auto. You can create 50 lines based on a split percentage. You can do that based on a fixed value. You can predetermine all of that. You can also, in the coding screen, if you have, I know in my background, I've had mobile bills and I've had a macro spreadsheet where it spits out all of my lines for me. You can upload from Excel straight into the system as well and split hundreds of coding lines. So absolutely, you can do that.
And this is quite an interesting question. The question relates to when the payment run is processed, and this customer uses 3 different systems to deliver their payment runs: Oracle Financials for the invoices, Concur for expenses, and Experian then for the BACS run itself. Mm-hmm. Can all of this be integrated and delivered through the automation within the P2P platform?
Yes.
Great, simple answer. I guess that's related to the whole answer around the integration piece in terms of how we provide that data out. So if that's the mechanism that's being used today, then effectively it's just 3 integrations rather than 1 at the back end when we output the data from the P2P platform.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. So this is a little bit around configuration, and Juliana's asking lots of great questions, keeping us on our toes. Who would build the codes and companies into the P2P system? Would that be the job of the customer, or would we do that?
So they come from the finance system. So we hold a replication of the codes, companies, etc., that are in the ERP or finance system. So nobody is manually doing it effectively. Everything is coming in through integration. And the ERP is always the only source of truth. It's where everything comes from, and it's where everything goes back to. So we are literally something in the middle that is making all of that happen quicker, more controlled, with audit, etc. So it's done via the integration. It's nobody's job, so to speak.
Great. And I guess a little bit related to that, and I know this is one of the real positives around some of the technology that we use. The question is there a basic system for everyone and then you pay extra to build on it? Or is there a set price to build the system you need? Which is quite an interesting question.
Yes. So the system is modular, but there is a basic, the invoice module. The invoice module itself will get you as far as really processing non-PO based invoices. And we are probably a little bit different as well, is that we typically will do sort of fixed price implementations. We have done this a lot. We know the system that we're delivering, certainly the one I've shown today, inside out. So we will, we know what's going to happen. Unless it's a really unusual ERP that we might need to, go through something different. So the invoice module is for non-PO. The purchase order matching module allows you to then match against your purchase orders. And that's really the most basic side of the system. And those reports, they're not an extra. They come as standard within the system. They are like the minimum of what goes on. There are other modules that are available, such as a buyer module, which if you wanted to start creating purchase orders within the workflow tool itself, you can. It's not an inventory-based module. It's more for corporate overheads, but it will allow you to raise orders. There's a really simple rudimental employee expense module that you can add on. So there are other things that you can add into it at any point in time that you need. The other thing that's really important is this system is not based on users. We don't care how many users are in the system. The pricing is all based on your volume of invoices. So it's really key that you make sure you know your lowest volume of invoices that you need to start with. You can also increase through the tiers as you need to go. So you're only ever paying for what you use.
And I know that the system as well, Rach, also enables self-administration of the workflows in terms of building those workflows yourself, rather than having to come back to a supplier and say, can you build me a workflow, please, and get a day rate for doing that?
Definitely. And when I did my first implementation back many years ago in Sydney, that's this type of system that I implemented, which when you do your first one, I didn't think it through. And every time I wanted anything changed, I had to sit in a help desk queue, raise a ticket, and pay for the privilege of making a small change to my system. So when I moved into this side and was responsible for selecting systems, that was right up there on my priority list. I'm very self-sufficient. I didn't want to be asking anyone to do anything for me. I wanted to do everything myself, and absolutely it's completely administered within the whole system with whoever has the admin rights.
Last question, I think, looking at the time, and apologies for any questions that we've missed, which we will follow up on and answer directly via email or telephone. But the last one's quite an interesting one and relates to, I guess, one of the clients that was on that customer list. Are there consultants based in Ireland that can facilitate implementation of the system on site?
Yeah, so potentially this question might mean I have to interpret a little bit. So it might mean that the deployment is required to be on premise rather than hosted. So the answer to that is we actually don't need to be on site to deploy the system, even if it's you choose to deploy it within your own infrastructure. We can do everything remotely. If it is about somebody coming onto site to do training, etc., we can do that. The implementation cost that we deliver is all based on remote working, because it's kind of the new way anyway, but it allows us to reach more people at one time. We can come on site and do come on site and actually do, you know, face-to-face implementations. There is kind of nothing that we implement face-to-face. Most of it is all done in the cloud anyway. So I'm not sure which side of Katya's question that was. Either or, but also to point out that we actually don't have to come on site.
And the list of clients, there was a large Irish client, I believe, on that list.
Oh yes, the HSE. So yeah, for those that don't know, the equivalent of the National Health Service, but in Ireland. Yes, the HSE are using the system that I just showed. In Ireland as well, we have PRL Logistics, who do the logistics for Guinness. And Procter & Gamble and some other big names, and also a parts company doing car parts called J&S Automotive. So I have 3 Dublin-based customers, and then in Belfast we have OML, which is the big arena in Belfast, and all of their facilities that relate to that area. So yeah, one of my colleagues was there recently.
So I think we'll leave the questions there. I think we have answered the majority, if not all. One last one coming in. Okay, one last one. Lisa asks, currently we process 20,000 plus invoices per month with a failure rate of 50% not going through first time, mainly due to PO not goods receipted.
Yeah. Okay. So I covered that a little bit in the invoice log screen, but one of the questions becomes, why are they not goods receipted? Is it that they're coming in, the invoice is arriving genuinely before the goods have arrived, in which case the rematching will just take care of that for you, the rematching process. If it's because the people in the business are not doing their job, I did say that after rematching days, it becomes an exception. But there's one other thing that you can do in this software, is the first time an invoice arrives into the system, if it has not been goods receipted, the configuration can be set to instantly send a copy of that invoice to the PO requester. In the worst case scenario, they get a heads up that the goods are on their way because they've got the invoice, or it is a reminder before it even becomes an exception for them to go in and do the goods receipt. So we have other options for that.
So again, removing the administration away from the accounts team and pushing it out to those individuals that are responsible for the failure.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Okay, let's leave it there. I would just like to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. Rachel, thank you very much once again. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Yeah, you know purchase to pay inside out. I can't say any more. And for all of the questions that we've received today, very engaging. Some great questions that have kept us on our toes. As we've said, there are a number of handouts. There's an opportunity to request a more detailed presentation. And on that note, Rachel, thank you. Everybody, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks for joining the webinar that Stratus have delivered today. Thank you.
Thank you.